This really happened to me. And even now, years later, I can still feel the burn of it in my chest. It started with a bottle of bourbon sitting half empty on the mahogany table in my daughter's. Denver condo, the glow of the city lights flickering against the glass. Around that table with family, gathered for what was supposed to be a celebration. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair and, with a smug grin, announced that everything my daughter owned, our family's money, her stability, her future, was legally his. Now he said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, savoring every syllable. And when I looked into my daughter's trembling eyes, I realized he had already humiliated her beyond words. That was the moment I knew he had betrayed her, betrayed me, and he thought we were powerless to stop him. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is. Right now, it's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The bourbon glass still trembled in my hand as his words echoed. He thought it was funny turning my daughter's pain into his victory. My mind reeled, piecing together all the little signs I'd ignored. The secret phone calls, the sudden trips, the coldness in her smile when she insisted everything was fine. I had trusted him once, even welcomed him into my family. And now I was staring at the man who had spent years weaving a web around my daughter's life and mine. I remember driving home through the snowy streets of Denver that night, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The mile-high city's lights blurred in the frost on the windshield, and every traffic light felt like it was daring me to confront the truth. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man who had watched someone take pride in destroying my family. At 64, people expect you to be slowing down, maybe retreating into the comfort of retirement. But as I parked in my quiet neighborhood off South University Boulevard, I felt something inside me harden. I wasn't done. I wasn't broken. And if my son-in-law thought he could dismantle everything I had built, everything my wife and I had worked for decades to protect, he was about to learn what it meant to cross a man who had nothing left to lose but his resolve. That night, lying awake in the silence of my home, I began to trace back the cracks I remembered the first time he came around, flashing that charming smile in the warm glow of a summer barbecue. My daughter was radiant, and I had wanted to believe him worthy of her. But even then, there was something slick in the way he talked, like every word was rehearsed. My wife had nudged me and whispered, "Don't be so hard on him, he's young." And I had forced myself to smile, if only I had listened to my gut. The deeper I thought, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. He had orchestrated something bigger. I started combing through records, bills, company filings, anything I could get my hands on. And with every detail, a picture began to form of the empire he thought untouchable. He wasn't just manipulating my daughter. He was building his power on lies, debts, and stolen trust. I didn't know yet how deep his arrogance went, but I promised myself I would find every weak point in his castle of glass. I would burn it down until all that remained was the echo of the empire he thought he had stolen. And the first step came faster than I could have imagined, in a phone call the very next morning that would change everything. The morning after the bourbon, I woke with the taste of smoke in my mouth, not from any fire, but from the heat of indignation that had settled in my chest. I sat at my kitchen table on South University Boulevard and made a list like a man who knew how to count things that mattered. Facts, people, dates. I wrote down every odd conversation, every unexplained withdrawal my daughter had mentioned in passing, the names she had muttered when she was half asleep, and too ashamed to say aloud. I didn't yet know how to prove a conspiracy. I only knew how to hunt for truth. I started small and local. I drove back to my daughter's condo a second time before noon, ostensibly to check on her. But the real reason was to look. I told myself I was being protective, the sort of father who checks the locks and the smoke detectors, but what I was really doing was scanning for the first exposed tendon of a lie receipts mail. Anything that looked fresher than it should. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the bourbon lingered on the coasters. My daughter Emma hugged me like she always did, quick, apologetic, as if she might be forgiven for existing in the middle of a storm she couldn't understand. "You don't have to do this, Dad," she said, her voice a thread. "I'll handle it." I saw the set of her jaw, and the way her fingers tried to pretend they were straightening a book that was already perfect. She was trying to be brave for me and for herself. I hated that I promised her I would be the storm. I began with the obvious bank statements. Emma had been meticulous with her finances for years, paying down student loans, investing in a modest Roth, tucking away money for the kids. She was never careless, so when I found a stack of recent credit card statements shoved in the kitchen drawer beneath a breakfast recipe book, my stomach dropped. There were charges that didn't fit hotel rooms in Littleton. Under a name I didn't recognize, transfers to shell-sounding LLCS, and a payment to Hudson Consulting that suddenly drained half a month's salary. The numbers were small enough to look like normal life until you traced the timeline and saw they were part of a pattern. Steady, secretive growing. I called in an old friend, someone you want on your side when you're poking at nests of hornets. Tom Martinez, retired FBI salt and pepper hair, a mind that never stopped cataloging the worlds. Small betrayals. Tom and I had worked together on a neighborhood safety board. Years ago, he was the kind of man who'd audit your candlesticks and ask the right question. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't blink. "Keep everything where it is," he said. "Don't let anyone near those files. People hide things in plain sight. It's a classic move. Leave a paper trail, don't create one." He taught me how to photograph documents without touching them, how to note dates and serial numbers, how to make copies and seal them in an envelope with a Sharpie scrawl that read, "Do not open." He made me feel like a junior detective at first, which was both ridiculous and useful. I was 64, and I had to learn to crouch in shadows, like a man half my age. That humbling made me steadier. Tom helped me put the first pieces together. We traced Hudson Consulting to a tiny suite in a cheery office park off I-25, an address that when we drove past turned out to be a virtual mailbox. We pulled up business registrations and found names that overlapped with companies my son-in-law Marcus had once boasted about over beers. Marcus had always been good at names. Slick titles. The kind of language that made ordinary things sound important. Strategic partnerships, growth, advisement, portfolio optimization. He used those words like a magician uses palms and mirrors. But the real bomb was an internal email chain I stumbled across by accident. My daughter had been forwarding text threads to herself when things felt uncertain. Messages she thought were harmless. One of these texts had been a screenshot of an email from Marcus to a board associate named Peter A.C. Singh, an account identified only as Operations Hudson LL Kakom. The subject line read, "Finalize escrow. Move Emma's allocation Q2." The phrasing made my head spin. Escrow move meant money. Allocation meant stealing the future. Q2 meant it had been planned months ago. Marcus had always been able to finesse conversations to sound like a man who treasured family values while he picked apart people's lives. At the Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier, he gave a toast about loyalty that could have been printed and sold as a motivational poster. He laughed at appropriate times and kissed his mother-in-law on the cheek. I had once told him, in a fatherly way, that charm was like a currency. He had smiled and said he preferred investing it. I had meant it as a joke. He had meant something else entirely. By the end of the week, what began as suspicion had hardened into a list of potential crimes. There were unauthorized transfers that could be framed as adult decisions by a consenting daughter, but there were also signatures, forged-looking documents, and a trust amendment that had appeared on a courthouse docket the day after Marcus moved in. I drove to the Denver County Recorder's office and sat under fluorescent lights, while the clerk printed out filings that smelled faintly of bureaucracy and malice. There, framed in black and white, was the amendment, Emma's name removed as a primary beneficiary, on a small trust her late mother had established, replaced by, wait for it, Marcus's legal name. "You can contest this," the clerk said when she saw my face. "But there are time windows, and if the paperwork is clean, it's harder than you think." Those words should have made me panic. Instead, they sharpened me. The woman who had once been my wife, gone 7 years no, had painstakingly arranged protections for our children. That man had walked into our life and with quiet bureaucracy began to dismantle them. It felt personal in the bones. Emma didn't want to involve the police, yet. She feared making things worse for herself and for her kids, which is something I understood. The legal world feels like quicksand to people who have bills and jobs and mortgage payments to think about. So we played our hand slowly. Tom put me in touch with an attorney who ran a small boutique practice near Union Station. Claire Daniels, sharp, impatient, and crucially unafraid of men who imagined themselves untouchable, Claire listened to my story without theatrics. She took the documents, flipped through them with a precision that told me she saw patterns as I saw them. Her verdict was cautious but hopeful. "We can freeze certain transfers if we act fast," she said. "But we need to show hardship and potential harm. It's not just about anger. Money talks in court, and we need to make it clear whose voice is being silenced." While Claire prepared letters that smelled of legal leverage, I did something I hadn't done since before retirement. I sat down at a computer and started to reconstruct Marcus's world. Social media was a map of vanity. LinkedIn painted him as a serial entrepreneur. Facebook showed curated family dinners. Instagram highlighted golf outings and sunsets. But the deeper things, the business registrations, the little notice non-profit that paid Marcos consultants, were buried in public records, and a few colleagues who were cautious enough to talk if you asked the right questions. A name would appear, then another, and soon an entire spiderweb of ghost companies and consulting fees began to map out from his personal accounts to anonymous entities. All of this corroborated something Tom had said in the kitchen when the sun was low and his tea had gone cold. "You look at these types," he said, "and you realize they're not daring, they're mathematical. They build scaffolding that looks legal enough until someone with fewer distractions starts pulling threads." He tapped his fingers on the table like a man who counts windows in a building. "We don't charge in guns or knives. We charge in patience and paper." I spent nights poring over spreadsheets, cross-referencing dates, watching for anomalies. The stakes were not just financial, they were psychological. Marcus was confident because he had not faced resistance. He believed his victims would accept the new reality rather than fight for the old. Underestimating that arrogance was the first mistake he made. The first real confrontation came at a school fundraiser at the Daniels Elementary Auditorium in Aurora. I arrived under the pretense of supporting the PTA True, but it also guaranteed I'd see Marcus in public, where he would be on his best behavior. He stood near the buffet, laughing the kind of laugh that spreads like oil slick. Easy, he greeted me with that polished smile, the one that never reached his eyes. "Hey, Frank," he said. "Good to see you. How's retirement treating you?" "It's fine," I said, enjoying the quiet. He had a way of taking compliments and recategorizing them. "Quiet is underrated," he said. After all, someone has to handle the noise. There was a flicker in his expression, a micro-expression like a crease that tells a tailor where to stitch, and I knew he was measuring me for threat. He was the kind of man who mistook courtesy for weakness. I decided to test him, but only slightly. "How are you and Emma doing?" I asked, watching his fingers. He put a hand on my shoulder like a man who believed in theatricality. "We're great. In fact, it's been the best year. Emma is more settled than ever. You should be proud. Pride had nothing to do with it. You could see the arrogance in the way he spoke of our daughter, as if she were a portfolio. Something. You managed, allocated, liquidated." That night he left the event with applause and pats on the back. I left with a plan. If the villain in this story had hubris, my weapon would be method. I had seen too many men like him in decades of life. Men who built facades so carefully. They forgot they'd ever be required to explain themselves. Facades crack under scrutiny. Paper fractures under pressure. Secrets leak. Claire filed an emergency motion, temporary injunctions to halt transfers, subpoenas to force accounts to reveal their owner structures. The judge signed with the careful hand of someone who has seen the theater of family disputes before a courthouse in downtown Denver that smelled like old coffee and new precedents. Marcus's lawyer, young, expensive, and practiced at doing 1,000 small favors for the right people, sneered when served the order. He treated us like ants underfoot. "You're making a spectacle," he said, leaning too close at the courthouse steps. "This will go away. Spectacles have power. They attract witnesses. They introduce facts into light. We had the advantage of truth wearing the armor of paper. Marcus had the advantage of his own confidence." The first subpoena revealed something that made my hands tremble, a ledger entry, showing monthly consulting fees paid from Marcus's personal account to an entity that, when traced, linked back to a real estate holding company where Marcus was a shadow director. In plain terms, he used the pretense of consulting to funnel money and create processes that siphoned assets away from Emma. The money trail led to properties in Aurora and a shell, LLC, that had bought a small building near Colfax Avenue space that Marcus had rented as office and filled with empty desks. It was ugly and beautiful all at once, the ugliness of betrayal and the beauty of proof aligning. Marcus' arrogance had not anticipated subpoenas. He had assumed a slow burn, not a flashlight. He lashed out in predictable ways. He called Emma at odd hours, alternating between contrition and threats. He made vague accusations about our motives show. We were destabilizing his family. How we were grandstanding. He tried to paint me as a meddling parent. That was a tactic he had used since the wedding flip. The script made the accuser look unbalanced, but his temper revealed things he couldn't hide with charm. He began to send terse emails to his own associates, names he had once introduced as partners, now written in capitals with exclamation points. He booked a meeting at a courthouse conference room and invited 6 men in suits, men who had been quiet for years and who now spoke in clipped terms about reputational risk. That was the first time I saw him shaken. Between Claire's motions, Tom's quiet interviews, and my own stubborn, digging the world Marcus had crafted began to fray. I found a bank teller in Littleton who remembered seeing Marcus' wallet, thick watch bright signing for a cashier's check, in a name that matched a utility bill from a property he wasn't supposed to own. I found a former business partner who'd been paid off to leave town and had the receipts to prove his silence. Little things, small betrayals, returned like echoes, and with each echo, Marcus' empire creaked a little louder. One evening, as snow spat against the windows like staccato applause, Emma sat across from me with 2 mugs of tea that steamed between us. Her hands trembled less than they had at the bourbon table, like a woman regaining fingers one at a time. "Dad," she said, voice steady enough to frighten me because it was so deliberate. "What if he hurts someone? What if he tries to take the house? What if then he will have to answer for it?" I said, "And when he does, it will be in a room full of people who know what he did. He won't be able to smile his way out of it." She leaned into me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the small, heavy warmth of trust. It steadied me in ways threats could never manage. Then my phone buzzed and the caller ID read, in crisp black letters, Marcus's name. I let it ring. When it stopped, my mailbox held nothing but a single envelope, heavy and official. Looking inside was a letter from Marcus' lawyer, a threat of slander suit if Claire continued to malign Marcus' reputation, a demand to return all personal items and cease and desist from contact with Emma. In the corner of the envelope was a slipper threat, hidden in civility. That night Tom visited, and we sat with the letter between us like a map. "You see how he plays it," Tom said. "He tries to weaponize civility, to create fear. It's a class act." "Then, well, meet class with evidence," I said. "We had momentum, but a battle is rarely won by momentum alone. It's won by pivot, by making the enemy respond to your moves, rather than the other way around." Marcus still had one advantage: the appearance of control. He bought it with money, with charm, with the assumption that people would rather avoid conflict than stir the pot. We needed to make conflict less costly for Emma and more costly for him. Claire suggested an aggressive move on that would force the issue in public and make hiding impossible. It meant calling a press conference and presenting the compiled evidence, not as a spectacle, but as an act of accountability. Marcus, she said, thrived in private. Expose him in public, and his empire would suffer not only legally, but socially. Investors might flee, lenders might reconsider, and his carefully curated friends would begin to ask uncomfortable questions. It was bold, it was risky, it would make us vulnerable to counterattacks, but it also had the power to make a monster flinch. When I told Emma, she looked at me like a woman seeing a new horizon. "After years in fog, if you do this," she said softly, "then there's no going back. There rarely is when you try to drag a liar into the sun." I said, "But I will be with you until the end." That decision lit something in both of us. A kind of brave cruelty that comes only when the alternative is surrender. We scheduled a small press meeting at a civic center near Civic Center Park, where reporters are used to following courthouse drama like a favorite show. Claire had lined up a journalist who had covered corruption and who wanted to ask the right questions. Tom would be there. Emma would speak. I would stand at the back, old and steady. The morning of the press conference, I watched Marcus across the street through the cafe window, his posture a little too precise, his hands wrapped around a paper cup as if it were a talisman. He had called in favors and allies, people in suits who murmured to each other. He had tried to assemble a crowd to counter us. He was not going to go quietly. As the microphones warmed and the cameras focused, I felt the old nerves, the ones that used to make me shake before a speech. Back when I ran small campaigns for the neighborhood council, I felt them settle into something else, resolution. Emma stepped forward, and for the first time, the world watched the woman. Marcus had tried to shrink. She read the list of documents, the transfers, the dates. Her voice broke twice and steadied. Cameras clicked. Her story sank like a stake into Marcus's shadow. At the edge of the crowd, I saw him flinch, once sharp as a bird startled into flight. That was all the proof I needed, that the man who had thought himself untouchable had finally been touched. The empire had a crack. Then the phone in my jacket buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I glanced down, and the screen flashed a single chilling line from an unknown email that had just been pushed into my inbox. We have eyes everywhere. The senders were anonymous. Their message was not. The moment froze. We had poked a sleeping animal, and it had answered the email that read, "We have eyes everywhere," landed, like a blade across the throat of the morning. For a moment, the world narrowed to that sentence, and the pulse between my ears, whoever had sent it, wanted to remind us that this was not just a civil dispute. This was a turf war with players who didn't respect ordinary boundaries. Claire wanted to call the police at once. Tom wanted to trace the header. I wanted to do both, and something else I wanted to look at it, the way a man looks at fire. Understand where it feeds so you can smother it. I opened my laptop under the pretense of checking email, and while my hands didn't quite steady, I copied the metadata and forwarded it to Tom with a single line. Find the sender. Tom's reply came in under an hour. We can pull an IP. We can get a subpoena for the host. But whoever did this is masking well. They wanted to scare you. Don't show fear. That night the house felt different. Snow had stopped and the city lights hummed softer than usual. I made coffee at midnight and sat at my kitchen island like a man on watch. There's a rhythm to danger when it comes disguised as paperwork, the legal filings, the subpoenas, the affidavits. But there is another rhythm too, one that smells of cigarettes and cheap cologne, and the rustle of sneakers against linoleum. That was the rhythm of people who think they can intimidate you out of what is rightfully yours. Emma decided she needed to leave the condo for a while. Claire arranged a safe house, an aunt in Littleton, who lived in a tidy ranch with lace curtains. It felt surreal watching my grown daughter fold her life into a couple of overnight bags. She moved like someone stripping a painting from its frame, careful, precise, as though she were trying to leave no damage behind. The press conference had rattled him more than I'd expected. Marcus's face, usually a mask of leisure, had gone a fraction tight in the camera glare. That flinch emboldened people to talk to. Claire phone calls that had been silent for months, returned whispers and admissions, surfacing like minnows when the pond is stirred. Contractors, former assistants. A woman who had once been his bookkeeper, names he'd only seen on legal documents, now wanted to be useful. They were tired of being useful to a man who turned their loyalty into silence. But useful people aren't always truthful. Some wanted to help because they felt guilt. Some wanted to help because they wanted to see him fall. Claire, with the careful cynicism of a good litigator, passed motives and kept the ones with corroborating receipts. We began to build a narrative that courts and the public could not ignore a pattern of transfers, forged signatures and manipulative documents timed to coincide with emotional vulnerability. One by one, the ledger of his crimes developed a legible handwriting. Marcus responded with the kind of theater he believed would sway the public. He produced a statement saying the allegations were baseless attempts at defamation by a bitter father looking for relevance. He scheduled interviews smiling with practiced sorrow and set up a GoFundMe for what he called the legal damages to his family. People with no context donated. That should have been infuriating. Instead, it was instructive. He had invested in narratives, and he had a small cache of people who would repeat them. Winning a court of public opinion is often a matter of noise, and Marcus knew how to buy volume. My counter was quieter but meaner. I asked Claire to obtain a forensic audit of Marcus' accounts and to prepare in secret a motion to compel his business records. If Marcus chose spectacle, we chose the slow, cold machinery of law. Spectacle is loud, and ephemeral paper once subpoenaed does not lie easily. We also made sure that every public claim he made had an immediate documented rebuttal ready. When he spun a story on a local talk show, Claire had a short summary sent that corrected dates and previously unreported transfers. The truth does not always win, but the truth with neat legal footnotes becomes harder to ignore. That didn't mean the attacks stopped. If anything, they intensified one morning. I found my mailbox rummaged through bills, scattered like leaves on my front porch. The note left behind was simple and scornful. Watch your daughter. There are threats that come wrapped in brute force, and threats that come wrapped in law. This one was a mixed civic menace with an undertone of personal cruelty. I called Tom. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "They're rattling the cage. Don't let them know where the hammer is." We upped security cameras. I'd once thought excessive small domes at the corners of my house. A motion sensor light over the driveway were installed in earnest. I learned the basics of a surveillance feed, how to rewind, how to annotate, how to export a clip without corrupting it. It felt ridiculous at first, me 64, learning how to right-click a camera, but it also felt necessary. There is dignity in preparedness. Then came the night that changed the temperature of the whole operation. My phone buzzed while I was making myself a late sandwich. The label read, "Home camera alert." I thought briefly of mice or a raccoon. The clip I opened made me drop the knife. The feed showed the hallway of Emma's condo. Dim amber light, the frame photos of weddings and vacations on the wall. The runner that had once been my wife's favorite. And there, moving slowly past the camera's range, was a man I knew too well, one of Marcus's acquaintances, a petty operator with a history of intimidation. He wore gloves and moved like someone who had done this before. He opened a drawer, rifled through papers, and then, with a small, satisfied shake of his head, took something that looked like a folder and slipped it under his jacket. He worked with a kind of bored efficiency that made him more frightening than a shout. The clip ended with the man looking right at the camera as if he knew it was watching and smiling. I called Emma first. Her voice, when she answered, had that brittle quality of someone who is learning to hope while not counting on it. She was at the aunt's safe for the moment. I told her what he'd seen and she cried, quiet and fast. Then I called Claire and Tom. We were no longer dealing with mere financial manipulation. We were dealing with criminal trespass and evidence theft. Claire's legal mind moved like a clean machine. She wanted an immediate police report. Tom wanted to find the intruders. Prints. I wanted the condos, management logs and entry swipe records. Together, we assembled an approach that combined digital forensics and good, old-fashioned police work. We would take the clip to the police, demand they act, and crucially, use the footage to push the city to treat this as more than a domestic squabble. At the precinct, the officer who took the report folded the printout and looked at me with a patience that suggested he had seen more than his share of family fights. Claire's presence shifted the room. Having an attorney in the corner asking pointed questions moves the world in a way a single frightened man never can. The officer agreed to take the footage to run it against known associates. He asked for access logs. He said the word we were all waiting for in a frightened whisper. Well, see if we can find matches. That night, we sat around my kitchen table like conspirators at a funeral. The theft had made the stakes concretely criminal. Marcus had crossed into an area where public sympathy matters less than prosecution. The question was whether he'd been clever enough to keep his hands clean or clumsy enough to leave a trail. Days stretched thin with subpoenas and interviews. The condo's management company turned over entry logs. They showed the anonymous man entering on a date and time that matched our clip. The swipe card he used was logged as a visitor, pass registered curiously, under a name associated with a property owned by a shell, LLC, that had financial ties to Marcus. The thread tightened. We served the subpoena on the bank. They produced a heap of documents. Wire transfers, cashier's checks, and a curious memo line that read, in Marcus's handwriting, when compared to other documents. For settlement, the handwriting matched the world that had seemed amorphous, now had fingerprints on paper. Marcus pushed back theatrically. He called the theft a staged incident, a contrived attempt to discredit him. He accused Claire of coaching witnesses. He alleged bias in the press. But the bank's documents were harder to dismiss. Claire filed a motion to have certain assets frozen pending the investigation. She also asked the DA's office to take a look at the matter of theft and conspiracy. Marcus' allies, once confident, began to look disposable. And then, just when we thought we had the leverage, someone fed a shorter, sharper fear back into our ranks. An envelope arrived for me at home with a single Polaroid Insidia photo of Emma asleep on a couch in the aunt's living room. The television on mute in the background. The caption, handwritten and cruel, "We see the safe room." That image changed everything in a way the subpoenas hadn't possibility turned into fear. Emma's safe house was no longer safe. The enemy had not only the capability to move through doors, they had the nerve to taunt us with proof Claire demanded protection. Tom tightened his network. I called in favors I'd long ago forgotten. I could call in a retired judge friend who knew a security consultant, a neighbor with a locksmith business who would come at midnight and reinforce doors. The aunt's house became a fortress overnight, but fortresses are expensive and awkward measures for the short-term, not the sustained campaign we were now committed to. It was in that thin, jittery state that I realized two things at once. First, that Marcus would escalate until someone stopped him. Second, that stopping him required not merely law or force, but cleverness. He had strength in mobility and money. I had the advantage that comes with being underestimated, and the time to design a plan that used his assumptions against him. Claire proposed a sting. She wanted to bait him with what he thought he wanted. Most control and the illusion of settling the matter quietly. We would feed a false document into the network, a phony amendment neatly printed and notarized with a number that matched the county recorder's format, but was in fact a decoy. The goal was to watch who moved on it, to catch the hands that touched the bait. It was risky. If Marcus sniffed deception, he would clamp down harder. But it also promised the clarity we needed. The identity of his inner circle. I argued for a second, layer digital breadcrumbs that would allow Tom to trace any access. We would seed the file on a secured cloud and monitor downloads. Whoever retrieved it would reveal themselves in patterns, IP addresses, times devices. It was the oldest trick in the Bookwatch, who reaches for the cheese. We set it. The fake amendment slept in the cloud like a tempting apple. We sat and waited with the patience of men who had discovered the peculiar pleasure of being architects rather than arsonists. 2 nights later, an alert lit my phone the file had been accessed. The IP traced to a co-working space near Colfax. The timestamp matched a time-stamped credit card receipt for a coffee shop around the corner. Cameras at that co-working hub captured a man in a navy jacket hood. Up, moving with a purpose that suggested familiarity. He carried a manila envelope, Tom called it. Claire prepared the affidavits. The man in the navy jacket stepped into a net, woven with patient fingers, and a map of his predictable decisions. It was not the drunk bravado of a direct assault. It was the quiet surgical stupidity of someone who thought himself too clever to be caught. That arrogance is a kind of signature we had seen before. When the police moved in, they found the man with evidence on a laptop. Downloads, logs, messages to a burner number that traced back through layers to a concierge at a management company with a name everyone in Marcos' orbit recognized. The net widened. On the drive home that night, my hands relaxed for the first time in weeks. The road glistened. The city lights blurred into a ribbon of soft glare. For a few miles, the radio played nothing but simple songs. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Then my phone lit up with a new message. A link and a single line. Look up. I tapped the link. The screen filled with a live image, my daughter's face, centered and wide-eyed, but not behind glass. This time, she was on the screen of a webcam I had never seen before, tethered to a URL that made the hair on my arm stand up. The woman behind the camera spoke in a voice I did not recognize. And then slowly, Marcus leaned into the frame. Nice trick, he said. Smug as ever, as if the world were a stage, and he had always been the headliner. You thought you could expose me without consequences. Something in the line of his mouth told me we had set a gear in motion that couldn't be reversed. I slammed the laptop shut, and the kitchen filled with a silence that was louder than any siren. We had baited a trap, and the trap had shown its teeth. I slammed the laptop shut, but the image of Marcus leaning into that anonymous webcam burned into my mind like a brand. He had wanted me to see him, wanted me to know he was watching, back. That was his message. His smug smile was the punctuation mark on his claim of invincibility. For the first time since this war began, I understood he wasn't just manipulating paper and money. He was turning the fight into psychological theater. Emma, asleep at her aunt's house, knew nothing of what I had just seen. I drove there in the middle of the night, headlights cutting through the quiet suburban streets of Littleton. The ranch house looked innocent under the moonlight, but I felt eyes everywhere. I checked every lock, every window, walked the perimeter, like a soldier circling a camp. When Emma came to the door in a robe, her face pale from sleep, I lied and told her I'd had a bad dream. She hugged me, and I prayed she didn't feel the tremor in my chest. The next morning, Claire, Tom, and I sat at my kitchen table, our war council. I replayed the video for them, forcing myself to look again at Marcus's smug face on that grainy feed. Tom leaned forward, studying every pixel, like it was a crime scene. Claire, arms crossed, whispered, "Hare's not just arrogant. Hare's taunting us. That means he's nervous. Nervous men get reckless." Tom added his voice like gravel. That was the first time I truly believed we might be able to turn his arrogance into his undoing. But I also knew we had crossed into dangerous territory. If Marcus had eyes in places we hadn't found, he could be closer than we thought. Over the next week, we tightened our circle. Claire filed motions to accelerate discovery. Tom worked his contacts to identify the webcam source. I focused on strategy, not panic. Every move Marcus made told me something about his weaknesses. He was too showy, too desperate to prove control. He was playing a performance while we were building a case. Performances win applause, cases win judgments. Still, Marcus wasn't done with his performance. 3 days later, at dusk, I came home to find a black SUV idling at the end of my street. Its windows were tinted so dark, they reflected the orange wash of the setting sun like a mirror. I parked in my driveway, pretending not to notice, but every nerve in my body screamed. After 10 minutes, the SUV rolled away, slow and deliberate, as if to say, we can be here whenever we want. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I mapped out the empire. Marcus had built the shell companies. The fake consulting fees, the stolen trust. Piece by piece, I pinned every connection to a corkboard in my study. Lines of red string stretched between companies, properties, and names. By dawn, I had something I hadn't before, a blueprint of his corruption. It wasn't just Emma. He'd stolen from Head, used his empire to scam investors, dodge taxes, and launder money through fake businesses. He thought he was too clever to get caught, but he'd made one fatal mistake. He underestimated how relentless a 64-year-old man with nothing left to lose could be. The next morning, I presented the board to Claire and Tom. We're not just fighting for Emma anymore, I said. We're going to burn the entire empire. Claire's eyes gleamed with something I hadn't seen before, a mix of professional hunger and moral fury. Tom, ever the realist, nodded. Once, then we do it carefully. Because when a man like Marcus feels cornered, he bites. We set the plan in motion. Claire prepared a RICO angle racketeering charges that could tie Marcus's shell companies together under one conspiracy. Tom coordinated with investigators who knew how to peel back the layers of fake LLCS. And me, I played my role as the bait. I attended every public event Marcus might be at, making sure he saw me steady. Unafraid, I wanted him to think I was just a stubborn old man chasing a family squabble, while in reality, we were building a fire under his throne. Then came the night when Marcus finally cracked. Emma called me, her voice trembling. Dad, he showed up here at Aunt Maggie's. He didn't knock, he just stood in the yard, staring through the window until I screamed. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. But the message was clear. Marcus wanted us to feel hunted. He wanted us to break before the court date. Instead, all he did was hand us proof of harassment and intimidation. Claire filed it the next morning, attaching Emma's statement, Maggie's corroboration, and the police report. The judge, tired of Marcus' antics, issued a restraining order, effective immediately. For the first time, Marcus had a piece of paper with his name on it that he couldn't manipulate. I watched him that afternoon standing outside the courthouse as he was served the order. He tried to smirk, tried to look unbothered. But there was a crack in his face, a twitch in his jaw. For the first time, he looked small. And that was when I knew the empire was already burning. But what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was how violently Marcus would lash out when he realized the walls were closing in. Because that very night, the first ember of real fire lit up in our war. That very night, the ember Marcus had promised us finally sparked into a flame. I was sitting at my study desk, the corkboard of red strings looming like a map of war behind me, when the acrid smell hit my nose, smoke faint but unmistakable. At first I thought it was a neighbor burning leaves. Then the smoke alarm shrieked. I bolted down the hallway, heart hammering, and saw the glow outside my living room window. Flames licked at the edge of my garage, small but hungry. Someone had thrown what looked like a Molotov. Cocktail, a crude bottle charred black at the base of the siding. The fire crawled upward, eager to devour. I grabbed the extinguisher, cursing, spraying, until the flames hissed and died. My hand shook, not from the effort, but from the certainty Marcus had escalated. Head moved from threats and smirks to arson. The bastard had tried to burn me alive in my own home. The police come, lights flashing red against the quiet Denver street. Neighbors stood in robes, whispering. The officer who took the report looked grim. "This isn't random," he said. "This is a message. I already knew that. And I also knew messages could be traced." Tom arrived within the hour, his eyes scanning the street like radar. "Hez sloppy, now," Tom muttered, crouching to inspect the broken bottle. "That means we can catch him." Claire, when I called, was furious. "We escalate full protective order. And if he so much as sneezes near you, we drag him into custody." But something in me had changed as I watched the scorch marks on my siding. Fear had been replaced by resolve. If Marcus wanted war, I would give him war on a scale he couldn't imagine. The next morning we filed not just for protection, but for a full financial freeze. Claire presented the judge with evidence of harassment, arson attempt, and ongoing fraud, judges in Denver. See all sorts of family disputes, but not many with Molotov cocktails in the file. We got the freeze. Marcus' accounts, the lifeblood of his empire, were locked, pending investigation. The news spread fast. His investors panicked. Partners pulled back. The man who once strutted through fundraisers like a king now found doors closed to him. And that's when more people came forward, people who had been too scared to speak, but now smelled blood in the water, a contractor he'd stiffed, a secretary he'd berated, a cousin who'd been swindled out of an inheritance. Piece by piece, Marcus' network turned from shield to noose. Still he fought. He hired new lawyers, tried to paint himself as the victim of a vendetta led by an obsessive father-in-law. He went on local TV crying crocodile tears about how his family was being torn apart. The performance might have fooled some, but not those who had seen the real man. And with every performance we countered, with documents, dates, signatures, transfers, truth steady and merciless. Then came the subpoena that broke his back. One of Tom's contacts traced Marcus shell companies to a storage unit near Aurora. The court ordered it opened. Inside, stacked neatly in bankers' boxes, was the smoking gun forged trust amendments. Fake invoices, even ledgers with Marcus's own handwriting detailing payouts. It wasn't just fraud, it was conspiracy. It wasn't just a civil case anymore, it was criminal. When I saw those boxes wheeled into evidence, my chest felt both heavy and light. Heavy with the years Emma had lost light, with the certainty that justice was finally real. Marcus was arrested 2 days later, taken in cuffs from his condo downtown. The news cameras loved it. The same cameras that had once recorded his confident smirk now captured the twitch of his jaw, the sweat at his temple. For all his charm and arrogance, Marcus looked small with his wrists bound in steel. But revenge is never just about one arrest. It's about ensuring the empire doesn't rise again. So while Marcus sat in jail awaiting charges, I did what he never expected. I went after the roots. I contacted every investor, every partner, every bank. With Claire's legal filings and Tom's evidence, we dismantled every piece of his structure. Properties were seized, accounts, frozen, companies dissolved. What had once been a smug little empire became ashes on paper. And through it all, Emma stood taller. She testified in court with a voice steady enough to make strangers weep. She told the truth Marcus had tried to bury. And when the verdict came, guilty on fraud, forgery, conspiracy, she held my hand, and I knew my late wife would have been proud. Marcus got 12 years. His empire was gone. His name was mud. I was 64 when I burned his empire to the ground. Not with fire, but with patience, truth, and the relentless resolve of a father who refused to watch his family destroyed. And as I stood outside the courthouse that last day, watching Marcus taken away, I felt no triumph, only a chilling calm. Because revenge once served doesn't feel like victory. It feels like silence, and silence is louder than fire. The silence after Marcus's sentencing was almost unbearable. For months I had lived on adrenaline motions. Filed subpoenas, served threats. Answered every day. A new move in the war. When the gavel fell and the bailiff led Marcus away in shackles, there was no cheer inside me, no cinematic swell of victory. Only the hollow quiet of an empire reduced to ash. Emma and I walked out of the Denver County Courthouse into the bright Colorado sun. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, asking how it felt to win. Emma, steady and pale, said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about surviving." Her words cut through the frenzy, and for a brief moment I saw her not as my little girl, but as a woman forged in a fire. That night we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had plotted his downfall with Claire and Tom, the same kitchen where fear had once lived in every shadow. We ate simple food, a roast, chicken potatoes, and spoke of ordinary things. Emma's children, the aunt's garden, the Rockies next season. The normalcy was almost surreal. For the first time in years, Emma laughed without forcing it. The sound was brittle at first, then whole. But in the quiet hours after she went to bed, I found myself staring again at the corkboard in my study. The red strings were still there, a monument to obsession. I thought about tearing it down, burning it like Marcus' empire, but something in me couldn't. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was memory proof that we had fought and endured. So I left it a private museum of scars. Marcus, even from prison, tried to claw back. Letters came written in his smooth, smug script, pretending remorse while hinting at vengeance. I didn't reply. Claire advised us to keep them sealed. Hand them to the authorities. But sometimes at night I'd unfold one just to look at the handwriting. The ink was shaky. Now the arrogance dulled. Prison has a way of aging a man faster than years. Tom and I met often for coffee in the month that followed. He told me the official investigations into Marcus' empire had rippled outward. Partners indicted properties, seized debts, exposed. "You didn't just take down one man," Tom said. "One morning, stirring his cup, you collapsed a network. Most people don't live to see justice ripple like that." I thought of my wife then gone 7 years and how she had built those trusts to protect Emma and the kids. Marcus had tried to desecrate her legacy. I had made sure he failed. That was the only justice I needed. Emma eventually sold the condo where the bourbon humiliation had begun. She bought a smaller house in Centennial, a place with a backyard where her kids could play without fear. The first time I visited, she stood at the fence watching them chase each other in the grass. "I feel free again." "Dad?" she whispered. I nodded, but inside I knew freedom never comes without ghosts. The last time I saw Marcus was 6 months later, during a hearing where his lawyer begged for a reduced sentence. He looked thinner, his hair greyer, his eyes sunken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow defiance. When he saw me in the gallery, he tried to smirk, but his lips barely moved. For the first time, he looked like what he truly was, not a king. Not a mastermind, but a small man in a cage of his own making. When the judge denied his appeal, Marco's shoulders slumped. He didn't look back at me when they led him away, and that was the moment I understood revenge's final lesson. It doesn't end with triumph, but with indifference. A life moved on. Emma rebuilt. The kids grew. I grew older. But sometimes late at night, when the house was still, I would stand in front of that corkboard of strings. I would trace the lines with my finger, remembering every betrayal, every fear, every moment we thought we might lose. And I would remind myself of one thing. At 64, I had burned an empire, not with rage, but with resolve. And though Marcus' name faded from headlines, though his empire lay in ruins, there was one truth that stayed with me sharp as glass. The most dangerous man is not the youngest or the strongest or the richest. The most dangerous man is the one who has already lost everything once and refuses to lose again. The end.